Hello, welcome to Pursuit of a Perfect System and another video as part of my long-term review for the Arcam AVR30, which you cannot see there on the desk behind me. That is the Arcam AVR850, and on top of it is a Lima Acoustics Elements stereo, or actually mono if you choose to use it that way, power amplifier. And I was using the two of those together up until very recently, and if you'd like to know why I was doing that and how I was doing that, and it was bringing better performance, then leave some comments down below in the comments section and I'll make a video explaining what I was doing with those. Now, the reason I'm back so soon to make another video about the Arcam AVR30 is not because I've been able to test every single facet of its performance, functions and features. There's just no way that's possible in a couple of days. The reason I'm back to speak about it again is because in that last video there was some comments, or really some complaints left, that I hadn't spoken about the AVR30's sound quality and hadn't compared the sound quality to the AVR850. Now, that was completely deliberate, and as a result of me having at that time not even installed the AVR30. And there's two things I feel very strongly about, and the first one is I think we should have the AVR30 in the shop with us so that you can see it, as opposed to the AVR850. Now, in order to do that, we need to go to my main review or home cinema or listening room, whichever you want to call it, because I've now installed the AVR30 and I've had it in the system for a good few days. And on that point, I think that's the second thing I feel very strongly about, is once I've installed a piece of HiFi or home cinema, in order to review it, I like to leave that piece of kit in my system as much as possible, and really for as long as possible, so that I feel like I get to know it, get to experience it, get to feel and fully appreciate what it's like to live with, experience and enjoy on a day-to-day basis. And I don't think you can do that if you're constantly pulling things in and out and making changes. So on that note, let's go take a look. So I've had the AVR30 installed for a few days, and I've been watching some familiar movie content, stuff that I use to review products with, and I've watched two films in their entirety. I've watched John Wick 3 and Midway. Both of those were on 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray with Dolby Atmos soundtracks. Really interesting, these two discs, because they really, I think, epitomise how different a movie soundtrack can be produced and sound. And I think one of them's a reference, one of them's probably about an 8 out of 10 for sound quality, but I'll maybe talk a bit more about that later. What I've taken from watching those two full movies and watching the other bits of familiar content that I'm used to is that Arcam have done a really very impressive job with the AVR30. Part of the installation process of getting to know the Arcam AVR30, obviously I updated the firmware to the latest version 1.10. That took actually a couple of goes to get that to go fully through and update everything, i.e. the network side of things with it. That forced me to go onto a web browser and log into the AVR30 via a web browser, which is a very cool feature and allows you to fully control all the options and the menu settings and other things for it, which is a very nice addition. Doing it that way as opposed to having a big on-screen menu. And that is the next thing you'll notice with this new range of AVRs. Arcam have gone away from that kind of old school looking menu system that comes up on the screen. Instead, now we've only got really a very small kind of like two-line menu system, which at first takes some getting used to. 24 hours or so later of messing around with it, you kind of get your head around it. So instead of using that big on-screen menu, nowadays we'll just log in via a web browser and you can control all the options that way, which is in a way more slick because you can do it away from the screen, so you can technically do it while you're watching things. When it came time to working with Dirac Live and then uploading Dirac Live calibration files to the AVR30, for starters, there now is 3 memory slots. So you can have 3 different calibrations loaded onto the AVR30, and then you can change between them in its own menu structure. So it's very quick and easy to change between options 1 or memory slots 1, 2 and 3. The files upload much quicker. They load up in seconds as opposed to minutes. That's a huge improvement and a great addition and I think shows that Arcam's got much better quality digital processing and other bits going on. So as I'm working with the AVR30, and as I say, I'm quickly working out that this is a different product. I need to approach it differently to a degree in terms of how I want to set it up. You can see the system here. Obviously, we've got the AV receiver. I'm also using a dedicated power amplifier to power the Dolby Atmos channels in here. I always use a stereo integrated or power amplifier to power the front, left and right speakers. So naturally there's a lot of analog connections going between the AVR receiver, which is also acting as a processor and a preamplifier for those other amplifier channels. The AVR30 has 2 dedicated subwoofer outputs, as you would expect. It's a sum mono signal, which is fine, but it's also a sum mono volume signal, which means there's no dedicated individual volume per subwoofer, which might be absolutely fine for you if you've got them exactly the same volume, i.e. using a digital volume control. But when you're using an analog volume control, it's very difficult to get both subwoofers at the exact same volume. So having some control of the volume of each individual subwoofer helps with the overall setup and calibration process. Very, very, very interestingly on the AVR30, and this is only something that I worked out through playing with the menu systems, is that you can choose to select channels 13 and 14 and channels 15 and 16 to be dedicated to subwoofers as well, or instead, which limits the number of channels you can use. You could only run, for example, a 7.4.4 system doing it that way. What I decided to do was use channels 13 and 14 to be dedicated subwoofer channels for the front 2 subwoofers, the 2 Rel Predator subwoofers. I said I've been really impressed with the Arcam AVR13. I have been really very impressed. Before I go into that, again, just want to reiterate how I'm using it. So the Arcam AVR30 is powering 5 channels. It's powering the center speaker, which is a KEF reference 2C, and it's powering the 4 surround or base layer surround channels. So left and right surrounds and left and right rear surrounds. So it's not powering the front, left and right, which are probably the 2 most demanding speakers in this system. Then we've got, at the moment, a Chord Electronics T-Toby. Now that is powering the front, left and right speakers, and the Arcam P429 is powering the 4 Dolby Atmos speakers. Now the 4 surround and 4 Dolby Atmos speakers, which hopefully you can kind of see one there behind me, they are all KEF LS50s. So my current review home cinema system is 8 KEF LS50s for surround and home cinema Dolby Atmos duties, and the front arrays KEF reference 3 speakers and a KEF reference 2C center speaker. So how does the AVR30 sound compared to the AVR850? Very, very interesting one. In a lot of ways it sounds very similar, and I'm really glad about that, because new owners of Arcam, new ways and means of thinking, new DAC sections, new other things that I'm sure are bound to be in there, which are the reasons we're getting all these improved menu systems, options, flexibilities, improved Dirac, etc. I was worried that they would change the tonal qualities or change how the amplifier sounds, and I'm very pleased to report they haven't. It still very much sounds like an Arcam AVR AV receiver. It's still got that slightly warmer, slightly softer transient, where it just gives you a really engaging and nice amount of detail presented to you with refinement. And I think that is probably the big thing that you get when you go up to something like the AVR30 or the AVR850. You get more refinement to the sound, sweeter, smoother, nicer and more engaging and more refined sound presentation. And that is exactly what you get with the AVR30, but there's more. And the more is that you can clearly hear where this AVR30 is a very clear step up from the previous AVR850 in 2 main key areas. The AVR30 seems to process the sound faster, and it definitely gives you greater and improved resolution to the sound. And when you combine those 2 things together, you get a overall sound presentation which reminds me more like you're listening to a pre and power combination setup than you are listening to what is essentially an integrated home cinema product. Just to explain that a little bit better, movie soundtracks are clearer, movie sound effects are clearer, movie surround effects are clearer, movie Dolby Atmos effects are clearer. Again, looking at the two examples of discs, for example, John Wick 3, this is an outstanding, absolutely outstanding piece of sound work or soundtrack work. And it's different to John Wick 2 in the soundtrack. John Wick 2 is very raw and very rugged, whereas John Wick 3 is much more refined in its presentation, in the sound effects and the soundtrack that they've used. And I don't know if they've done that deliberately because they want to emphasize a different stage of that life, or that part of his life, or that, I suppose, experience that he's going through. You can clearly hear that. And by comparison, stepping over to Midway. Now, Midway is very much guns, explosions, battleships blowing up, airplanes blowing up. And the soundtrack for this is nowhere near as polished or nowhere near as refined as the soundtrack in John Wick. In fact, some of the explosions, they all sound the same, in all fairness. I'm no way disappointed with Midway. I'd give it an 8 out of 10 for soundtracks, and there's some really intense sequences in this that really put the AVR850 under the hammer, because I listen to movies very, very loud. You know, about as loud as they can be physically enjoyed at that sort of volumes. And a section in this Midway film just got more intense and more intense and more intense. And I was kind of sitting in the chair there, I was kind of cringing, thinking something's about to blow up in a minute. There's just so much sound and there's so much intensity and there's so much bass. And it didn't. This whole system just delivered it and delivered it and delivered it and delivered it and then delivered it even more. Really, very, very, very impressive. And you know, just speaking quickly about this movie, when you experience it on a really, really high quality system with a big sound and a big screen and a big image, it really brings home some of the atrocities that these people lived through and some of the things they had to do in order to just essentially survive and keep other people alive. Really, 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 for that point alone, very interesting film. So from the few days I've spent with the AVR850, all I've done so far is watch films. I haven't really listened to any music or anything like that. And this review is far, far, far from done. This is just me giving you a bit more information about how it sounds compared to before. Would I upgrade from the AVR850 to the AVR850? Well, I think that really depends on A, how much money you've got, B, whether the extra features of the AVR850 are appealing to you. Maybe you want the extra channels, maybe you'd like dedicated processing and channels for 4 subwoofers, stuff like that, which makes the AVR850 a no-brainer. Obviously, Dirac bass control hasn't come yet. I haven't experienced that yet. That could be another reason for upgrading to the AVR850. So to me, that's an interesting one. That's not such an easy recommendation to make at the moment. Although if you went from an AVR850 to an AVR850, I think you would definitely notice the improvement in the areas that I've just been discussing with you, providing I think you're already maxing out what the AVR850 could give you or can give you. I think that's really, really important. And a lot of that will come from how you set it up and how you use Dirac Live to maximize the sound quality. Again, that is what I'm particularly good at. Something I hadn't really thought about before is, to me, in my mindset, I was thinking, you know, the AVR850 is going to be a potential natural upgrade for AVR850 customers. But that is me, I think, completely missing a trick there. What about AVR390 and AVR550 customers? They're probably the ones that are thinking, oh, I didn't go with an 850 last time around. Should I go up to an AVR30 this time around? And I think for those customers, providing you've got the budget and providing, you know, you feel you've got the speaker system to get out of the AVR30 what it can deliver, then I think that's when it becomes a very, very interesting and serious proposition. But before AVR390 and 550 and just everyone else gets too excited, there are a lot of bugs currently with the AVR30. I've had things like lip sync issues, I've had some playback issues, I've had a few other things. Most of them were fixed by doing obviously the firmware update and then doing a master reset of the AVR30. But things haven't been perfect and things haven't been perfect. So that begs the question, should you buy the AVR30 now or should you wait? And that really depends on, I think, you as a customer, how you are as a person, and I think how you just feel as an individual. Because if you buy an AVR30 now, yes, you are going to have some issues, and yes, you are going to face some bugs. Either way, Arcam are aware, and they are working really, really hard to fix them as quickly as possible. So I find that very reassuring. So again, how do you feel as an individual? If you've just spent £5,000 on an AVR30, and you expect it to be absolutely perfect out of the box and work perfectly, then now is not the time to buy it. You can still work with it, you can still watch films with it, you can still upload Dirac files to it, you can still enjoy it, but you have to bear in mind that things aren't perfect. You might have to change the lip sync for different films, and there's going to be a few other things with it that are not working perfectly. If you're happy to go with that, then yeah, why not? Why wouldn't you jump in now with an AVR30, given the situation that suits you right now? So yeah, hopefully that gives you a bit of an insight into, you know, only a couple of days with this product, which is nowhere near enough time. But, you know, people were asking for it. People wanted more information about it. Yeah, I've had some bugs. Yeah, I've been shouting and swearing at it at times. But it's had me sitting here with a huge grin on my face as well. And that big grin, when a product you own or a product you listen to and use puts a big grin on your face, that's priceless. That's absolutely priceless. So yeah, thanks very much for watching. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.